The year was 2387, and Earth had become something special in the galaxy. Not the strongest or the smartest, but something else entirely. Humans had earned respect through 300 years of keeping their word when others would not. Captain Hein stood on the bridge of the UES Harmony watching the stars through the massive viewport. The ship orbited Luna in perfect silence. Around him his crew worked quietly at their stations. The blue glow of Earth filled one side of the bridge while the cold stars filled the other. Everything changed when the emergency signal came through. Lieutenant Taman looked up from his communications station with wide eyes. His face had gone pale in the blue light of his screens. "Captain, we have an incoming transmission. Priority Alpha from the Villani Embassy." Hyanwu turned from the viewport. In all his years of service he had never received a Priority Alpha. From any alien species, those signals meant only one thing: someone was dying. Put it through Taman. The main screen flickered and filled with the image of Kelf. The Villani ambassador looked nothing like a human. Her skin had a blue-green shimmer like deep ocean water. Her large eyes reflected light in ways that seemed almost magical. But today those beautiful eyes held nothing but terror. "Captain Hyanwu, I am sorry to contact you this way." Her voice carried the musical quality all Villani possessed, but it shook with fear. "My people are dying. Our homeworld, Aquatica Prime, is under attack by the Devourers." Hyanwu felt his blood turn cold. Every species in the galaxy knew about the Devourers. They were the nightmare that kept civilizations awake. Mechanical beings that consumed entire worlds for resources. They appeared without warning and left nothing behind but empty space. "How many ships do they have?" Hyanwu asked. "3 swarms, Captain. Each one the size of a small moon. They began their attack 6 days ago. Our bioorganic defenses cannot stop them. They adapt to everything we try." Tears ran down Kelthara's face, leaving silver trails. "Our floating cities are falling, one by one. The children..." Her voice broke. The bridge went completely silent. Even the soft hum of the ship's systems seemed to fade away. Hyanwu had served in many battles, but he had never seen despair like this. "What about the other major powers?" "The Corexians have the strongest military in the galaxy." Kelthara's shoulders dropped. "We asked them first. General Thaxmer said our world had no strategic value. The Ethereals claimed they needed more time to study the threat. The Nexus Collective said the profit margins were too low." She looked directly at Hyanwu through the screen. "You are our last hope, Captain. Humanity is our last hope." Hyanwu felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. The Villani were a peaceful species. They had never hurt anyone. They spent their time growing beautiful coral cities and creating art from living organisms. Their technology healed instead of destroyed. They had done nothing to deserve this fate. "I need to contact Fleet Command immediately. We will get back to you within the hour." "Thank you, Captain. I know humans keep their promises." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in darkness except for the instrument lights. Hyanwu stared at the blank screen for a long moment. Behind him, he could hear his crew whispering among themselves. "Timon, get me a direct channel to Admiral Biram on Earth. Priority Alpha clearance." "Yes, sir." Channel open. The screen filled with the face of Fleet Admiral Biram. She was 60 years old with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her uniform carried the ribbons of 40 years of service, including the Centauri conflicts and the Outer Rim Wars. Her eyes were steel gray, and they missed nothing. "Captain Hyanwu, I assume this is about the Villani transmission we intercepted." "Yes, Admiral, they need our help." Biram was quiet for several seconds. Behind her, Hyanwu could see the flags of Earth and the Terran Defense Fleet hanging on. "The Wa of the Devourers are not something we fight lightly, Captain. Intelligence reports suggest they have technology we barely understand. They learn from every battle and adapt their tactics. The Villani have nowhere else to turn, Admiral. Every other major power has refused to help." "I know." Biram's expression softened slightly. "I am calling an emergency session of the Defense Council. Report to Earth Command immediately. We need to make this decision as a species." The channel closed, and Hyanwu turned to his crew. "Set course for Earth. Maximum speed." The journey to Earth took 6 hours. During that time, Taman intercepted more Villani transmissions. Emergency broadcasts from Aquatica Prime showed the floating cities under attack. Massive mechanical constructs descended from space like metal storms. They tore apart the organic buildings and consumed everything in their path. In one transmission, a Villani mother sang a lullaby to her children as the Devourers closed in on their city. Her voice was beautiful, even in the face of death. The transmission cut off suddenly, leaving only static. Tae-Min had tears in his eyes as he turned off the recording. "Sir, how can the other species just ignore this?" Hyanwu looked out at Earth, growing larger in the viewport. The blue and green marble hung in space like a jewel. Humanity's homeworld, the place where people first looked up at the stars and decided to reach for them. Because Taman, they have forgotten something important. They have forgotten what it means to be the one who needs help. The UES Harmony docked at Earth Command Station 6 hours later. Hyanwu took a shuttle down to the surface and walked through the halls he had known since he was a young officer. The walls displayed the history of human space exploration, pictures of the first colonies, memorials to ships lost in distant battles, records of every promise humanity had made and kept. The Defense Council chamber was full when he arrived. Admiral Borum sat at the head of the table with 12 other senior officers. Their faces were grim as they studied tactical displays showing the Aquatica system. "Gentlemen and ladies," Borum began, "we face a choice that will define humanity's place in the galaxy. The Villani have asked for our help against an enemy that terrifies every species, including our own." Counselor Jiun spoke first. She was young for her position, but brilliant. "Admiral, our fleet is strong, but small. We have perhaps 50 ships that could make the journey to Aquatica Prime. The Devourers have 3 swarms with hundreds of constructs each. The mathematics are not in our favor, since when do humans fight? Only when the mathematics favor us." Admiral Borum asked quietly. The room fell silent. Every person there knew their history. Humanity had fought impossible odds before. At the Battle of New Geneva, 1 human ship had held off an entire enemy fleet. At the Siege of Titan Station, 12 human Marines had saved 10,000 civilians from certain death. General One Seek cleared his throat. "If we commit our fleet to this battle and lose, we leave Earth defenseless. Our first duty is to protect humanity." "Our first duty," Borum replied, "is to be human. And humans help those who cannot help themselves." She stood and walked to the large window overlooking Earth. The planet turned slowly below them, showing the lights of cities and the green of growing things. 300 years ago, we were the ones asking for help. When the AI rebellion threatened to destroy every human colony who came to our aid. No one answered because everyone knew the truth. No one had come. Humanity had fought alone and won. Through sacrifice and determination, they had learned that when you are alone in the dark, you become very strong or you die. The Villani trusted us enough to ask for help when everyone else said no. That trust means something. Borum turned back. "To the Council, I am recommending we activate Protocol 7. Several Council members gasped. Protocol 7 had never been used. It was the activation of humanity's legendary fleet. Ships so famous and powerful they had become myths. Vessels that had earned their place in history through blood and sacrifice. "Admiral," Counselor Jion said carefully, "those ships and their crews are our greatest treasures. If we lose them, we lose part of our soul as a species." Borum smiled for the first time since the meeting began. "If we don't use them to help someone who needs us, then we have already lost our soul." The vote was unanimous. Humanity would answer. The Villani call for help. They would send their legends into battle against the darkness. They would keep their promise or die trying. As the council members filed out, Admiral Borum remained at the window, looking down at Earth. Captain Heim approached her. "Admiral, do you really think we can win?" Borum was quiet for a long moment. "Captain, I don't know if we can win, but I know who we are. We are the species that comes when others will not. We are the people who fight impossible battles because someone has to. We are human." She turned from the window. "Send the activation codes. Wake up the legends." It's time they earned their names again. Far above them, the first ships began to move. In the darkness between stars, ancient vessels stirred to life. Crews who had served together for decades prepared for one more battle. The legendary fleet was awakening, and the galaxy would never be the same. The activation codes went out across the galaxy at the speed of light. Admiral Borum sat in her command center watching as red dots appeared on the tactical display. Each dot represented a ship that had earned its place in human history. Ships that had become more than metal and circuits. They had become legends. The first to respond was the Use Indomitable. Captain Dong Hyan received the Protocol 7 message, while his ship drifted in the shadow of a dead star. The Indomitable was a kilometer long and had been home to him for 20 years. Its hull was scarred with the marks of 100 battles. Energy burns from plasma cannons, dents from asteroid impacts. Each mark told a story of survival against impossible odds. "All hands to battle stations," Dong Hyan announced over the ship's communication system. His voice carried the calm authority of a man who had faced death many times and always walked away. "This is not a drill. We have a Protocol 7 activation." The crew moved with the precision of people who had worked together for decades. Many of them had served on the Indomitable since it was first launched. They knew every pipe and wire in the ship. They knew each other's voices in the dark. They were more than a crew, they were a family. Chief Engineer Kyung Soo looked up from his station in the engine room. He was 50 years old and had gray hair, but his hands were steady as he began the startup sequence for the quantum drive. "Captain, the engines are warming up. We can be ready to jump in 30 minutes. Make it 20. Kung Su, people are dying while we sit here." The second ship to answer was the Use Phoenix. Commander Unesio stood on her bridge, watching her fighter squadrons return from a training exercise. The Phoenix was a carrier that had been destroyed and rebuilt 7 times. Each time it came back stronger and smarter than before. Each time it learned from the battles that had killed it. All squadrons returned to base immediately. She ordered, "Cancel all, shore, leave. We have an emergency deployment." Squadron leader Minho's voice came through the speakers from his fighter. "Commander, what's the situation?" "We're going to war, Minho. Real war against something that eats planets." There was silence on the channel for a moment. Then Minho's voice came back steady and confident. "Copy that, Commander. My pilots are ready." Yonesio smiled. Minho had led her fighter squadrons through the worst battles the Phoenix had ever faced. His pilots trusted him completely because he had never let them down. He had a gift for turning disasters into victories and defeats into lessons. The third response came from a ship that nobody saw coming. The UES Shadow simply appeared in Earth orbit without any warning. Its stealth systems were so advanced that even Earth's defense network didn't detect it until Captain Wujin sent his encrypted message directly to Admiral Bioram. "Shadow reporting for duty. Admiral ready for deployment." Bioram looked at her tactical display but saw nothing. The Shadow was invisible even to her best sensors. "Captain Wujin, I need to know you're really there." A moment later, a single light blinked on and off in the darkness. It was gone so quickly that Bioram almost missed it, but it was enough. The Shadow was real, and it was ready, but Wujin and his crew had spent the last 5 years infiltrating enemy territory throughout the galaxy. They had become ghosts that hostile forces told stories about. Ships that appeared from nowhere and struck where it hurt most before vanishing again. The Shadow was fear made real for humanity's enemies. The fourth ship to arrive was the UES Thunderbolt. Captain Haywan brought her heavy cruiser racing in from the outer rim where it had been testing new plasma weapons. The Thunderbolt was smaller than the Indomitable, but what it lacked in size, it made up for in pure firepower. Its experimental weapons could melt through armor that normal guns couldn't even scratch. "Admiral, this is Thunderbolt requesting permission to dock," Haywan announced as her ship approached Earth Command Station. "We have some new toys I think the Devourers will enjoy." Bioram smiled. Haywan was famous for her aggressive tactics and her love of experimental weapons. During the Treaty Wars, she had held off 3 enemy battle groups using nothing but clever positioning and weapons that barely worked. She turned every battle into a test of her latest ideas. "Permission granted, Captain. How are your new plasma systems working?" "They're beautiful, Admiral. They turn metal into soup and soup into vapor. I can't wait to see what they do to these Devourer things." The last ship to arrive was the oldest and most famous of them all. The EU's Defiance came out of deep space like a ghost from the past. It was 300 years old and had fought in every major war humanity had ever known. Its hull was a patchwork of repairs and upgrades from dozens of different battles. But its spirit had never been broken. Captain Junho stood on the bridge, looking at Earth through the forward viewport. He had been in self-imposed exile for 5 years after making a decision that saved a colony but cost him half his fleet. The guilt had driven him to the edge of space where he and the Defiance had waited for a chance to prove themselves again. "Earth Command, this is Defiance, requesting permission to rejoin the fleet." Admiral Bioram felt tears in her eyes as she heard that familiar voice. Junho had been one of her best captains before the incident that drove him away. "Permit granted, Captain. Welcome home." The 5 legendary ships gathered in Earth orbit like ancient gods awakening from sleep. Each one had a history that could fill books. Each crew had stories that would be told for generations. Together, they represented the best of what humanity could achieve when pushed to their limits. Admiral Bioram called a meeting of all 5 captains. They gathered in the conference room aboard Earth Command Station. Looking at them, she saw the faces of legends. These were the people who had made humanity's reputation in the galaxy. They were the reason other species respected humans despite their small numbers. "Captains, you know why you're here. The Vellani are facing extinction, and we're the only ones willing to help. The enemy we face is unlike anything we've fought before. The Devourers learn from every battle and adapt their tactics. What worked yesterday might get us killed tomorrow." Captain Donghan leaned forward. "Admiral, what do we know about their weaknesses?" "Intelligence suggests they struggle with unpredictable tactics. They're machines that think in mathematical patterns. Human creativity and intuition might be our best weapons." Commander Yonesio nodded. "My fighters can provide that unpredictability. We'll hit them in ways they can't calculate." Captain Wujin spoke quietly. "The Shadow has been monitoring their communications. They don't just destroy planets, they study them. They're learning about every species they consume. Which means," Captain Haywan added, "they probably know about us too. They know our tactics and our weapons." Captain Junho had been silent during the discussion. Now he looked up at Admiral Bioram. "Admiral, why did you really activate Protocol 7? You could have sent a regular battle fleet." Bioram was quiet for a moment. "Because, Captain, this isn't just about winning a battle. This is about showing the galaxy who we are. Every species is watching to see what humanity will do when asked for help. If we succeed, we prove that legends are real. If we fail, ... double quotes, she didn't finish the sentence. "If we fail," Junho said softly, "we fail as legends." There are worse ways to die. The meeting lasted for 3 more hours as they planned their approach to the Aquatica system. Each captain contributed their expertise. Donghan would lead the frontal assault with the Indomitable's massive guns. Unesio would provide fighter support and hit-and-run attacks. Wujin would gather intelligence and strike at weak points. Haewon would test her experimental weapons against Devourer armor. Junho would be their reserve commander, ready to make the hard decisions. As the meeting ended, Admiral Biram stood at the window looking out at the 5 ships. They hung in space like ancient warriors preparing for their final battle. Each one had earned its place in history through sacrifice and courage. Now they would write one more chapter in humanity's story. The computer began recording. Personal log, Admiral B. Today, I activated Protocol 7 and awakened humanity's legendary fleet. 5 ships and their crews are about to face an enemy that has destroyed countless worlds. I don't know if they can win, but I know who they are. They are legends and legends. Don't surrender. She closed the log and walked to her command center. In 6 hours, the legendary fleet would begin its journey to the Aquatica system. In 6 hours, humanity would discover if legends were strong enough to hold back the darkness. The answer would be written in stars and fire. The legendary fleet departed Earth orbit at dawn. 5 ships that had become symbols of human determination and courage now raced through space toward a battle that would test everything they had learned. The journey to Aquatica Prime would take 3 weeks through the dangerous Void Passage. But it was the fastest route available. Captain Dong Hyan stood on the bridge of the Indomitable watching the stars stretch into lines as they entered hyperspace. Around him, his crew worked with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this countless times before. But this time felt different. This time they were racing to save an entire species from extinction. Captain, we have stable hyperspace entry, reported Navigator Soyoung from her station. Estimated arrival at Aquatica Prime in 21 days. Thank you, Soyoung. Signal the other ships. Formation Omega. We travel together, or not at all. The 5 ships moved into a defensive formation that had been used by human fleets for over 2 centuries. The Indomitable took point with its heavy armor and powerful sensors. The Phoenix flew to starboard with its fighter squadrons ready to launch. The Thunderbolt covered the port side with its experimental weapons charged. The Shadow vanished into the darkness between the ships keeping watch for threats. The Defiance brought up the rear ready to assist wherever needed. During the first week of travel, Dr. Sunmi worked with Kelthera to understand Vellani technology and culture. The Vellani ambassador had insisted on coming with the fleet despite the danger. People were dying and she needed to be part of their rescue. Your bioorganic technology is remarkable, Dr. Sunmi said as she studied the data Kelthara provided. Your cities actually live and grow. Kelthara's large eyes reflected the soft lights of the medical bay where they worked. Yes, Dr. Sunmi, we do not build our homes. We grow them from the living coral of our oceans. Each city has its own consciousness. They think and feel and dream. And the Devourers are destroying this. They consume everything. The consciousness dies first. Then the coral becomes nothing but dead matter for their machines. Kelthera's voice carried a sadness deeper than the ocean. We are not just losing our homes. We are losing the souls of our world. Dr. Sunmi felt anger rising in her chest. The Devourers weren't just killing people. They were destroying an entire way of life that had taken millions of years to develop. We'll stop them, Kelthara. Somehow, we'll find a way. Chief Engineer Kung Su spent his time working with engineers from all 5 ships. They shared data about Devourer technology gathered from previous encounters. What they learned was disturbing. Look at these energy patterns, Kung Su said. Pointing to his display, the Devourers don't just adapt to weapons, they learn from them. Every shot fired teaches them something new. Engineer Namjin from the Phoenix nodded grimly. Our standard plasma weapons became useless after the first few battles. The Devourers started absorbing the energy and redirecting it back at us. What about kinetic weapons? Asked Engineer Hyo Sung from the Thunderbolt. Better, but not perfect. They adapt to those too, but it takes longer. Physical projectiles are harder for them to redirect than energy beams. Kung Su studied the data for hours trying to find patterns. There has to be something they can't adapt to. Some weakness we can exploit. The answer came from an unexpected source. Navigator Soyoung had been studying Devourer movement patterns. During their attacks on other worlds, she discovered something important. They follow mathematical formulas, she announced during a fleet-wide briefing. Every attack follows precise calculations. They treat planets like equations to be solved. Commander, Unesio leaned forward in her chair aboard the Phoenix. What happens if we give them equations that can't be solved? Human tactics, Captain Dong Hayan said with a slight smile. We don't follow mathematical patterns. We follow instinct and creativity. During the second week of travel, the fleet stopped at Meridian Station. The abandoned research facility orbited a dead star in the middle of nowhere. It had been evacuated years ago, but now it served as a refugee camp for people fleeing the DEVOURERS. The sight that greeted them was heartbreaking. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species crowded into spaces meant for 50 people. They had lost everything except their lives, and even those were not safe for long. Among the refugees was Rian, a young Vellani who had escaped when Aquatica's largest moon was consumed. She was barely more than a child, but her eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen too much death. The Devourers are not just destroying us, she told the assembled captains. They are studying us. Learning from every battle. Every defeat makes them stronger. Captain Junho knelt beside her chair. What do you mean studying you? They capture our people before they kill them. They scan their minds and memories. They are learning everything about how we think and fight. Rian's voice was small but clear. They know about humans now. They have studied your battles from the data they captured. The captains exchanged worried glances. If the Devourers knew about human tactics, then their advantage was already lost. There is something else, Rian continued. The Devourers are not heading for just our world. They are moving toward the galactic core where millions of people live. If they consume Aquatica Prime, they will have enough resources to become unstoppable. Captain Wujin spoke quietly from the shadows. How many Devourer constructs are at your homeworld? 3 swarms. Each one has hundreds of ships. They are larger than anything my people have ever seen. Rian looked up at the human captains with desperate hope. Can 5 ships really stop them? 5 ships have stopped worse things before, Captain Haywin said firmly. We just need to be smarter than they are. During the 3rd week of travel, the fleet began preparing for battle. Each ship ran constant drills and weapons tests. The crews trained until they could operate their systems blindfolded. They studied every piece of data about the Devourers, looking for weaknesses. Squadron leader Minho pushed his fighter pilots harder than ever before. They practiced attack patterns that made no mathematical sense, random approaches that followed no logic, except human intuition. Remember, he told his squadrons over the communication system, these machines think in straight lines. We think in spirals and curves and crazy loops. Use that, make them guess what you're going to do next. Captain Wujin used the shadow to scout ahead of the main fleet. His stealth ship could slip through Devourer sensors and gather intelligence without being detected. What he found was worse than they had feared. Admiral, the situation at Aquatica Prime is critical, he reported during an encrypted communication. The Devourers have built massive harvesting platforms around the planet. They are stripping away the ocean layer by layer. How much time do the Vellani have? Admiral Borum asked from Earth. Days at most. Maybe hours for some of the remaining cities. The knowledge that they were running out of time pushed the fleet even harder. The ships traveled at maximum speed through the dangerous currents of the Void Passage. Space twisted around them in ways that hurt to look at directly. Reality became fluid and uncertain, but the human crews held together. They had faith in their ships and their captains. They had trained for this moment their entire careers. They were ready to write their names in history or die trying. On the final day of travel, Dr. Sunmi made a discovery that changed everything. She had been studying the connection between Vellani consciousness and their living cities when she found something remarkable. Captain Donghan, you need to see this, she called from her laboratory. The Vellani aren't just connected to their cities, they're connected to the entire planet. Aquatica Prime itself is conscious. What does that mean, Doctor? It means we're not just fighting to save a species, we're fighting to save a living world that thinks and feels. And if we can establish communication with it, ... double quotes, she paused, looking at her data. We might have an ally more powerful than anything the Devourers have ever faced. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Aquatica system. What they saw through their sensors made even the veteran crews fall silent. 3 massive Devourer swarms surrounded the beautiful blue-green world like metal storms. Harvesting platforms the size of cities stripped resources from the planet's surface. The ocean that had once sparkled with life now burned with the fires of consumption. But they had come this far, and they would not turn back now. The legendary fleet formed into battle formation and began its approach to Aquatica Prime. Behind them stretched 3 weeks of preparation and planning. Ahead lay a battle that would determine the fate of 2 species. All ships, this is indomitable, Captain Donghan announced over the fleet communication system. Today we fight not just for the Vellani, but for everyone who believes that heroes are real. Today, we prove that legends never die. The 5 ships accelerated toward the largest space battle in human history. Their engines burned bright against the darkness, like stars being born. The Devourers had learned much about humanity from their captured data, but they had never learned the most important thing about humans. When everything looks hopeless and victory seems impossible, humans fight anyway. They fight because someone has to. They fight because it's right. The battle for Aquatica Prime was about to begin. The battle began at dawn over Aquatica Prime. The legendary fleet split into 3 groups as they approached the massive Devourer swarms. Each group had a different mission, but they all shared the same goal: save the Vellani or die trying. Captain Donghayan led the frontal assault with the Indomitable and Thunderbolt. His massive ship charged directly at the largest harvesting platform like an ancient warrior rushing into battle. The platform was the size of a small city and covered with weapons that could destroy normal ships with a single shot. All weapons, fire at will, Dong Hyan ordered as his ship closed the distance. Show these machines what human determination looks like. The Indomitable's main guns opened fire. Massive railguns launched tungsten projectiles at incredible speeds. Each round hit with the force of a small asteroid. The Devourer platform's shields flared and sparked under the assault. Direct hits, Captain, reported Weapons Officer Chung. Their shields are adapting but slowly. The kinetic rounds are harder for them to stop than energy weapons. Captain Haywon brought the Thunderbolt in from the side, firing her experimental plasma cannons. The new weapons turned sections of the harvesting platform into glowing metal soup, but even as they watched, the damaged areas began to repair themselves. These things heal fast, Haywon muttered as she watched metal flow back into place. We need to hit them harder than they can repair. The Devourers responded with overwhelming firepower. Hundreds of weapon ports opened across the platform's surface. Energy beams and missile swarms filled the space around the two human ships. The Indomitable's armor held, but warning lights flashed across the bridge. Hull breach on Deck 7, reported Chief Engineer Kung Su. Damage control teams responding. Meanwhile, Commander Unesio and the Phoenix attacked the second harvesting platform with hit-and-run tactics. Her fighter squadrons launched from the carrier's bays like angry wasps from a disturbed nest. Alpha Squadron, take the left approach vector. Squadron leader Minho ordered over the communication system. Beta Squadron, follow me in from below. Make your attacks random. Don't let them predict your movements. The fighters swept in at impossible angles, firing their weapons in patterns that made no mathematical sense. Some flew in spirals, others in zigzag lines. A few pilots even flew backwards while shooting. The Devourer defense systems tried to track them but kept missing as the fighters changed direction without warning. Direct hit on Weapons Array 7, reported pilot Jae-woo. As his fighter pulled away from the platform, that should slow down their point defense. But the Devourers were learning. Even as the human fighters scored hits, the mechanical entities began to adapt. Their tracking systems started to anticipate human unpredictability by calculating multiple possible flight paths. They're getting better at hitting us, Minho warned his squadrons. Switch to pattern Delta. No pilot flies the same way twice. Captain Woojin in the Shadow had the most dangerous mission. They needed to infiltrate the largest harvesting platform and gather intelligence about Devourer operations. The stealth ship slipped through the battle undetected like a ghost passing through walls. Approaching the target, Woojin reported to the fleet. Beginning infiltration procedures. The Shadow attached itself to the platform's hull using magnetic clamps. A small team led by Woojin cut through the outer armor and entered the alien structure. What they found inside was beyond anything they had imagined. The platform wasn't just a harvesting station. It was a massive computer system processing the consciousness of every being the Devourers had consumed. Millions of minds trapped in digital storage while their memories and experiences were analyzed. Fleet Command, this is Shadow, Woojin whispered into his communicator. You need to know what we found. They're not just killing people, they're stealing their souls. The discovery sent shockwaves through the human fleet. The Devourers weren't just destroying civilizations, they were collecting the knowledge and memories of entire species for some unknown purpose. But the battle was far from over. The third Devourer swarm had been waiting and watching. As the human ships engaged the first two platforms, the third swarm moved to surround them. Hundreds of Devourer ships closed in from all directions. We're being surrounded, Navigator Soyoung reported from the Indomitable. Devourer reinforcements coming from all vectors. Captain Dong Hyan studied his tactical display. The situation was becoming desperate. His ships were outnumbered 100 to 1, and the Devourers were adapting to their tactics faster than expected. All ships, this is Indomitable. Implement Plan Gamma. Random assault patterns. Keep them guessing. The legendary fleet broke formation and began attacking in completely unpredictable ways. The Phoenix launched all its fighters at once, then immediately recalled half of them. The Thunderbolt fired its main weapons at empty space, then suddenly turned to attack a different target. The Indomitable charged at one platform, then veered away to hit another. For a few precious minutes, the chaotic tactics worked. The couldn't predict what the humans would do next, because the humans weren't following any logical plan. They were fighting on instinct and creativity. Chief Engineer Kung Su had an idea that was either brilliant or insane. Captain, what if we use our quantum drives as weapons? Explain Q. If I can create artificial wormholes near the Devourer platforms, we might be able to redirect their own weapons back at them. Use their adaptive technology against them. It was dangerous. Creating wormholes in the middle of a battle could destroy their own ships. But they were running out of options. Do it, Kung Su began. The complex calculations needed to create controlled wormholes. The Indomitable's quantum drive hummed with power as space began to bend around the ship. Small tears, in reality, opened near the Devourer platforms. Wormholes stable, Captain, ready to redirect their weapons. The next Devourer volley was a massive energy beam, meant to destroy the Indomitable. Instead, the beam passed through one wormhole and emerged from another pointed directly back at the platform that fired it. The Devourers destroyed themselves. With their own weapon, incredible, breathed Weapons Officer Chongmin. Their own adaptive systems can't defend against their own technology. For a moment, it seemed like the tide was turning. The human ships pressed their advantage using the quantum wormholes to turn the Devourers' weapons against them. Platforms that had seemed invincible began to take serious damage. But the victory was short-lived. The main Devourer, Intelligence, was learning from the battle. It began to analyze human tactics, not just as individual moves, but as patterns of thinking. It studied every decision the human captains made, looking for the logic behind human creativity. "Captain, I'm detecting massive changes in Devourer behavior patterns," reported the ship's AI analyst. "They're not just adapting to our weapons, they're adapting to the way we think." The Devourers began to anticipate human unpredictability by calculating chaos itself. They started to predict random movements by analyzing the psychology of human decision-making. What had been humanity's greatest advantage was becoming their weakness. "They're using our own military history against us," Captain Dong Han realized. With growing horror, they've studied every human battle ever fought. They know how we think. The situation became desperate quickly. The Devourers stopped falling for human tricks and began to counter every move before it was made. Their weapons found targets that should have been impossible to hit. Their defenses anticipated attacks that hadn't been planned yet. The Thunderbolt took a direct hit that punched through its experimental armor. "Hull breach on all decks," Captain HFY reported as her ship began to list. "We're losing power to main weapons." The Phoenix's fighter squadrons found themselves flying into perfectly placed ambushes. "They know where we're going before we do," Squadron Leader Minho reported with frustration. "How do we fight an enemy that can predict the future?" Even the Shadow stealth systems were becoming useless. The Devourers had learned to track the ship by analyzing the pattern of what they couldn't see. Invisibility meant nothing to machines that could calculate absence. As the fourth hour of battle began, the legendary fleet found itself outgunned and outmaneuvered by an enemy that had learned to think like humans but without human limitations. The Devourers fought with mechanical precision, guided by stolen creativity. Fleet status report. Admiral Borum requested from Earth Command. Captain Dong Han looked at his tactical display. 2 of his ships were heavily damaged. His fighters were being shot down faster than they could be replaced. The Devourers had adapted to every advantage humanity possessed. "Admiral, we're in trouble. The enemy has learned to counter our unpredictability. They're using our own tactical thinking against us." There was silence on the communication channel for a long moment. Finally, Admiral Borum's voice came back steady and calm. "Captain, remember who you are. You're not just fighting for the Villani now. You're fighting for everyone who believes that heroes exist. Find a way to win." But as the Devourer swarms closed in from all sides, Captain Dong Han wondered if there was any way to defeat an enemy that could learn faster than humans could adapt. The legendary fleet had come to Aquatica Prime as humanity's greatest hope. Now they faced the possibility that legends could die just like anyone else. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since leaving Earth, the human crews began to wonder if courage and determination would be enough. The Devourers had learned to think like humans. The question now was whether humans could learn to think in ways that even machines couldn't understand. The second day of battle began with humanity losing. The legendary fleet that had arrived with such hope now fought desperately just to survive. The Devourers had learned to predict every human tactic and counter every move before it was made. Captain Dong Han stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching his ship's systems fail, one by one. The massive dreadnought that had seemed invincible was now listing badly to port. Smoke filled the corridors and emergency lights cast eerie shadows across the command center. "Hull breaches on decks 4 through 7. Chief Engineer Kung Su reported. His voice was calm, but Dong Han could hear the exhaustion behind it. "I can keep the main engines running, but we've lost half our weapon systems." The Thunderbolt was in even worse condition. Captain HFY had been forced to evacuate 3 entire sections of her ship after a Devourer energy beam punched completely through the hull. Her experimental weapons were offline, and her crew was running on emergency power. "Captain, we can't take much more of this," her tactical officer reported. "The hull is developing stress fractures. One more direct hit might break us apart." Commander Unesio, aboard the Phoenix, watched her fighter squadrons returning from their latest attack run. Half the fighters that had launched would never come home. Squadron Leader Minho's voice crackled over the communication system filled with static and pain. "We lost 6 more pilots on that run, Commander. The Devourers are anticipating every attack pattern we try. They know where we're going to be before we know it ourselves." The Shadow was the only ship still operating at full capacity, but even Captain Wujin was running out of options. His stealth ship could hide from Devourer sensors, but it couldn't hide from their predictive algorithms. They were tracking him by calculating where an invisible ship would logically go. The worst moment came when the Devourers began their psychological warfare. The mechanical entities had learned about human emotions from their captured data. They started broadcasting the final moments of every civilization they had consumed. The bridge speakers filled with the voices of the dying, children crying for parents who could not save them, elderly beings sharing their last words as their worlds burned, warriors making final stands against impossible odds. The sounds of extinction played over and over until some of the human crew members began to weep. "Turn off those communications," Captain Dong Hyen ordered, but his voice shook slightly. "I can't, sir," Lieutenant Timon replied. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies. Emergency channels, medical channels, even our internal ship communications. There's no way to block them completely." That was when Captain Junho made his decision. The Defiance had been holding back, serving as the fleet's reserve. The ancient battleship was the oldest vessel in the human fleet, and Junho had been waiting for the right moment to use it. As he watched his fellow captains struggle against an enemy that seemed unbeatable, he realized that moment had come. "All ships, this is Defiance," Junho announced over the fleet communication system. "I'm going to ram the central harvesting platform. That should give you time to regroup and find another way to win." "Captain Junho, don't do this." Admiral Borum's voice came from Earth Command. "There has to be another way. Admiral, sometimes the only way forward is through sacrifice. The Defiance has fought in every major human war for 3 centuries. It's time for her to write the final chapter of her story." Junho turned to his crew. These men and women had followed him into exile after his controversial decision 5 years ago. They had stayed with him when everyone else called him a failure. Now they would stay with him to the end. "All hands, this is the captain. I'm giving anyone who wants to leave 30 seconds to get to the escape pods. This is a volunteer mission only." Not one person moved from their station. "Captain, we've been with you for 5 years, waiting for a chance to prove ourselves again," Chief Navigation Officer Park Soo said quietly. "We're not leaving now." The Defiance turned toward the largest Devourer platform and began its final charge. The ancient ship's engines burned brighter than they had in decades as Junho pushed them beyond their safe limits. The battleship accelerated directly at the mechanical construct that was 10 times its size. "Defiance, this is indomitable. We're coming with you," Captain Dong Hyen's voice came over the speakers. "Negative indomitable. This is my fight. Take care of the others and find a way to win." The Devourers threw everything they had at the charging battleship. Energy beams and missile swarms filled the space around the Defiance. But the old ship's armor had been forged in the fires of 100 battles. It held together just long enough. The Defiance struck the harvesting platform's quantum core at full speed. The explosion lit up the entire Aquatica system like a newborn star. The temporal shockwave that followed froze time itself for several precious seconds, giving the other human ships a chance to escape the immediate danger. When the light faded, the Defiance was gone. So was the central harvesting platform. But the cost was terrible. Captain Junho and his crew had given their lives to buy time for their friends. Captain Woojin managed to rescue only one survivor from the wreckage. He found Junho floating in space, barely alive, his ship's command chair serving as an improvised life pod. The others, Junho whispered as medical teams rushed him to the shadows, sickbay. "I'm sorry, Captain, you were the only one." The loss of the Defiance broke something in the human fleet. These weren't just ships being destroyed. They were living legends, pieces of human heritage that could never be replaced. The surviving crews began to lose hope as the reality of their situation became clear. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting an enemy that learned faster than they could adapt. The Devourers pressed their advantage, surrounding the remaining 4 ships with overwhelming force. But in the medical bay of the Phoenix, Dr. Sunmi was making a discovery that would change everything. She had been treating wounded Villani refugees when she noticed something strange about their bioelectric patterns. "Calthera, I need you to look at this," she called to the Villani ambassador. "Your people's neural activity is spiking, but they're unconscious. What could cause that?" Calthara studied the medical readings with her large reflective eyes. "Doctor, they are not unconscious, they are connected. The planetary consciousness of Aquatica Prime is calling to them." "What do you mean calling to them?" "Our world is alive. Dr. Sunmi, it thinks and feels and dreams. Right now it is fighting back against the Devourers, but the effort is killing it. Each connection it makes with the machines drains more of its life force." Dr. Sunmi felt a chill run down her spine. "The planet is fighting the Devourers directly. Yes, but it cannot win alone. The Devourers are too strong and too many. Our world is dying trying to save us." That was when Chief Engineer Kyung-soo had the most desperate idea of his career. He had been monitoring the battle from the damaged Indomitable when he noticed energy patterns between the human ships and the planet below. "Captain, I think I know how we can turn this around," he announced over the ship's communication system. "But it's going to require something that's never been tried before." "What do you have in mind, Kyung-soo?" "What if we could create a feedback loop between our quantum drives and the planetary consciousness? If we could synchronize our ships, systems with Aquatica Prime, we might be able to turn the entire planet into a weapon. The idea was insane. It would require the human crews to connect their minds directly with an alien planetary consciousness they barely understood. The quantum synchronization could kill them, or worse, drive them permanently insane. How would we even begin to attempt something like that? Commander Unesio asked from the Phoenix. We would need the Villani to open their neural networks to us. Dr. Sunmi explained. Create a bridge between human and Villani consciousness that could interface with the planet itself. Kelthera looked frightened at the suggestion. Doctor, that is the most sacred connection my people possess. To share it with another species, ... Double quotes, she paused, thinking. But if it could save both our peoples, then we must try. The plan required incredible coordination and trust. The human crews would have to synchronize their quantum signatures with a planet-wide consciousness, while the Villani opened their most precious neural networks to alien minds. This has never been attempted, Dr. Sunmi warned. We don't know what will happen when human and Villani consciousness merge. We know what will happen if we don't try. Captain Donghayan replied grimly. We all die, and the Devourers move on to consume the next world. Commander Unesio began coordinating the effort from the Phoenix. Her tactical brilliance finally found a pattern in the Devourers' adaptation cycles. They learned from every victory and defeat, constantly optimizing their efficiency. But that optimization followed mathematical models, and mathematics could be exploited if you understood the formulas. I think I see it, she announced. The Devourers don't just learn randomly. They follow specific patterns when they adapt. If we can predict their learning curve, we might be able to stay one step ahead. As the human and Villani crews began the delicate process of neural synchronization, something unprecedented started to happen. The boundary between human intuition and Villani harmony began to dissolve. Two completely different ways of thinking merged into something that neither species could achieve alone. The quantum drives of the human ships hummed in perfect harmony with the bioelectric field of Aquatica Prime. For the first time since the battle began, the Devourers found themselves facing something they could not predict or understand. A hybrid consciousness that thought in ways no machine could calculate. The transformation began with a whisper that echoed across space and time. As the human and Villani consciousness merged through quantum synchronization, something beautiful and terrifying was born. The surviving ships of the legendary fleet stopped being separate vessels and became extensions of a single mind that spanned from the bridge crews to the living cities of Aquatica Prime. Captain Donghayan felt it first aboard the damaged and his thoughts suddenly expanded beyond his own mind. He could feel the presence of Commander Unesio, planning tactical moves 3 steps ahead. He sensed Captain Wu Jin, moving through shadows that existed in dimensions of pure strategy. He felt Captain Haywan's burning desire to protect the innocent merged with his own determination to never surrender. But most amazing of all, he could feel the planet itself. Aquatica Prime was not just alive, it was ancient and wise and filled with the memories of billions of Villani who had lived and died in harmony with their ocean world. The planet shared its knowledge freely, offering insights that no human mind could have discovered alone. All weapons target the quantum resonance points, Donghayan ordered, but his voice carried harmonics that seemed to come from the ocean depths themselves. Fire, not with human anger, but with Villani understanding. The Indomitable's railguns fired, but the tungsten projectiles were different now. They carried packets of pure creativity, bursts of chaotic human ingenuity wrapped in Villani harmony. When they struck the Devourer platforms, the mechanical entities encountered something they had never faced before. Weapons that followed no logical pattern because they were guided by intuition rather than mathematics. The Devourers tried to adapt, but found themselves confused by tactics that seemed to violate their understanding of strategic thinking. How do you counter a weapon that fires with compassion? How do you predict the path of a projectile guided by hope instead of physicist? Commander Unesio coordinated the renewed assault from the Phoenix, but she was no longer fighting alone. Her tactical awareness had merged with Villani navigators who could sense the flow of space itself. Together, they could anticipate enemy movements through intuitive understanding rather than tactical analysis. All fighter squadrons, this is Phoenix. Control, she announced. You are no longer flying human ships. You are swimming through space like creatures of the deep ocean. Follow the currents that exist in harmony, not logic. Squadron leader Minho led his remaining pilots in the final assault on the Devourer swarms. But these fighters moved differently now. They followed flight paths that existed in perfect balance. With the universe around them, they threaded through defensive fire by moving in rhythm with cosmic forces that had no names. I can see it, Pilot Jaewook reported with wonder in his voice. I can see the paths through their defenses. Not with my eyes but with something deeper. The fighter struck the Devourer constructs in ways that should have been impossible. They appeared where logic said they could not be, and disappeared into spaces that mathematics claimed were empty. The mechanical entities found their perfect calculations useless against opponents, who had learned to fly with their souls instead of their instruments. Captain Wu Jin and the Shadow revealed their true purpose in the final moments of the battle. For weeks they had been seeding quantum viruses throughout the Devourer network, tiny programs that lay dormant waiting for the perfect moment to activate. That moment had come. "All ships, this is Shadow," Wu Jin announced. "The viruses are ready. When they activate, the Devourers won't be destroyed. They'll be forced to experience the consciousness of every being they've consumed." The quantum viruses spread through the Devourer network like wildfire, but instead of destroying the mechanical entities, the programs forced them to feel. Suddenly every Devourer construct was flooded with the memories, emotions, and final thoughts of millions of organic beings. The machines that had consumed entire civilizations without feeling began to understand what they had destroyed. They experienced the last moments of every parent who died protecting their children. They felt the despair of every elder who watched their culture vanish forever. They knew the pain of every artist whose final masterpiece was consumed before it could be shared. The mechanical entities began to shut down one by one. Their perfect efficiency crumbled under the weight of organic emotion. Some tried to purge the viral programs but found they could not delete the memories without destroying their own learning systems. Others simply stopped functioning as they were overwhelmed by the magnitude of their own actions. The largest Devourer construct, the one that housed their main intelligence, fought back with desperate fury. It launched every weapon it possessed at the human fleet, trying to destroy the source of the quantum virus before the emotional overload became permanent. But the hybrid consciousness was ready. Captain Heiwan brought the wounded Thunderbolt into the path of the massive energy beam. Her ship should have been vaporized instantly. Instead, the experimental plasma systems that had been offline suddenly flared to life, powered by the bioelectric field of Aquatica Prime itself. The Thunderbolt absorbed the Devourer's most powerful weapon and redirected it back at the mechanical construct. The energy beam that was meant to destroy became a tool of liberation. It carried with it the combined will of every human and Villani consciousness in the system. The main Devourer intelligence tried to adapt to this final attack, but found it impossible. How do you defend against hope? How do you calculate the trajectory of love? How do you predict the power of two species choosing to trust each other completely? The massive construct began to break apart as its quantum core overloaded. But instead of exploding, it simply faded away, like a bad dream, ending at dawn. The smaller Devourer ships followed their leader into oblivion, unable to function without the guiding intelligence that had given their existence meaning. As the last enemy vessel disappeared into quantum static, the ocean of Aquatica Prime began to glow with soft blue light. The planet was healing itself, drawing energy from the victory to repair the damage the Devourers had caused. The Villani cities that had been thought lost emerged from the ocean depths, renewed and strengthened by their connection with human consciousness. The hybrid awareness that had saved them slowly separated back into individual minds, but the connection remained. Humans and Villani were forever changed by their shared experience. They had learned that different ways of thinking could create something greater than either species could achieve alone. Captain Donghyun stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, looking down at the beautiful blue-green world they had saved. His ship was battered and scarred, but it had earned new honors in the greatest battle of its long career. Fleet Status Report. Admiral Bioram requested from Earth Command. "Admiral, the Devourers have been defeated." Donghan replied, "Aquatica Prime is safe. The Villani people are safe. But we lost the Defiance and Captain Junho's crew. They gave their lives so the rest of us could find a way to win." There was silence on the communication channel for a long moment. "Captain, their sacrifice will be remembered. The Defiance fought in humanity's greatest battles for 3 centuries. There could be no more fitting end to such a legend." The surviving ships of the legendary fleet began the long journey home. The indomitable Phoenix, Shadow, and Thunderbolt limped through space, carrying their scars like badges of honor. Behind them, Aquatica Prime gleamed in the light of its sun, and throughout the galaxy, other species began to take notice. Humanity had proven something important. They had shown that their greatest strength wasn't their technology or their tactics, but their willingness to sacrifice everything for those who needed help. They had demonstrated that legends weren't just stories but promises that could be kept. Even in the darkest times, the news of the victory spread faster than the returning ships could travel. On worlds throughout the galaxy, beings who had never heard of humans began to ask questions. Who were these strange creatures who fought impossible battles for people they barely knew? Why did they risk everything to help others when safer options existed? The answer came in the form of a message broadcast to every inhabited system in the galaxy. Kelthara spoke for her people and for all those who had been saved by human courage. "When the darkness came for us, only one species answered our call. Remember this. Remember the humans who came when no one else would. Remember the legendary fleet that proved sometimes the smallest light can hold back the greatest darkness." Years passed and the survivors of the legendary fleet became instructors and mentors, training new generations of human and Villani crews. The quantum consciousness-linked technology developed during the battle revolutionized cooperation between species throughout the galaxy. Captain Dong Hyan now commanded a new Indomitable, built with both human engineering and Villani biotechnology. His crew included members of both species, their minds capable of the hybrid thinking that had proven so effective against mechanical enemies. The major galactic powers that had refused to help the Villani found themselves reconsidering their isolationist policies. The Ethereals began sharing their knowledge more freely. The Coraxians tempered their aggression with wisdom learned from human examples. The Nexus Collective invested in defense as well as profit, understanding that some things were more valuable than money. But most importantly, the legend of the legendary fleet lived on. Throughout the galaxy, when species faced extinction, when hope seemed lost, when darkness threatened to consume everything, someone always whispered the same words. Call the humans, they'll come. And they always did, because humans had learned something that no other species understood. True strength didn't come from size or weapons or technology. It came from the willingness to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. It came from keeping promises even when keeping them seemed impossible. The galaxy was a better place because 5 ships had answered a desperate call for help. 5 crews had chosen to fight for strangers because it was the right thing to do. 5 legends had written their names in the stars. With courage and sacrifice and hope, the legendary fleet would never be forgotten. Their story would be told for generations as proof that heroes were real, and that sometimes when everything looks hopeless, the smallest light really can hold back the greatest darkness. On the end, that was what made humans special. Not their ships, or their weapons, or their tactics, but their absolute refusal to let evil win without a fight. They were the species that came when no one else would. They were legends, and legends never die.